Good evening, San Marcos. I hope that you are doing all well, that though we are going through trying and challenging circumstances, that you are also experiencing in many ways the grace, mercy, and faithfulness of God during this time. We continue to pray together, walk together in the faith, and trust in God's sovereign hand over all of this and his good and perfect ultimate purposes for us through the different stages and moments in history. And though the current period is one of particular darkness, we also trust and walk in the understanding and faith that the darkness does not consume or overwhelm the light, but that darkness is overwhelmed by the light of Christ. And that's our faith, that's our hope, that's what allows us to continue to walk in and persevere in our faith. And my prayer is that we would all continue to grow in our walk with the Lord, communion with the Lord, and that the Lord would use this time to more deeply teach us what it means to rely and depend completely on him and to surrender our lives completely to him. I come to you this evening to deliver to you, as it were, to communicate a special announcement on behalf of the session as a whole, but particularly on behalf of myself as pastor, senior pastor of the church, and on behalf of my family. We have a special announcement that isn't easy to communicate, but is necessary to communicate during this time. I would have loved to be able to talk about this with you in person, but present circumstances being what they are, it seems wise to still get away, still communicate this to all of you and not wait till later. The announcement is, in a sense, very simple, at the same time, very complicated. The story behind it is very long. I will definitely need to give you the Cliff Notes version of the announcement for now and the news for now. But hopefully over time we can relay a little bit more context and details. The simple announcement is that my family and I have, after a long period of discussion, prayer, a lot of thinking, a lot of crying, have decided that we are to move to the United States of America in the coming months, Lord willing, before the end of the year. Our plan is to move to the state of Florida, to the city of Tampa, and to carry out a ministry there at a church and continue to raise our family in the northern area of Tampa for the foreseeable future. This comes as a result of a long process. Again, the summary is that toward the end of last year, 2019, we reached sort of a dead end with the educational process of our son, our eldest son, I should say now, Benjamin. As many of you know, he is on the autism spectrum, and therefore he needs special assistance in his education, and he needs to be in some sort of format or system that is inclusive and that can include or integrate special needs children into their coursework, into their system. There are a few schools here in Chile that claim to do that. We applied to, I think it was around 15 plus schools, public and private, and toward the end of last year, we just realized that this wasn't going anywhere. All of the schools closed their doors to us. All the schools basically gave us a very clear no, and we were running and have been running out of options ever since. This led us in a process of reflection, prayer, conversation, discussion, trying to work out what the next best steps were. And we opened ourselves up to the possibility that the Lord might be leading us to a different place, a different country. We explored several options, including the possibility of traveling to another country as missionaries and plugging Ben into some school in a few other countries. In that capacity as missionaries, we looked at a few options for us, a few other countries. But after a long process, we received a call from a little church in a northern area, northern suburb of Tampa, called Cornerstone, a Presbyterian church They have been happy to call me as their senior minister there. And on Friday, just this past Friday, we got a confirmation by means of the presbytery, the denominational regional structure there, that has given us the confidence that we can now move ahead with the move. This is a hard choice, a choice that has not been easy for us as a family, but one that we think is right, that is prioritizing the needs of our family and of our children during this time. We understand that this is a strange time to move to the United States, that the United States is going through a very tumultuous period and year, but that has also been true for Chile. And we have had to soberly acknowledge that this is a time of turmoil and uncertainty all around the world. We live in an uncertain and fallen world, and we're quite clear that wherever we were to go, whether we were to stay in Chile, move to the US, or move anywhere else, any decision is an act of deep reliance, dependence, and trust in our Lord during this time, and that there are no guarantees anywhere. It's funny, the Bible has told us that all along, but I think we've gotten used to living in fairly comfortable circumstances. And I acknowledge that I myself have forgotten that at times. I've written a few things down because I want to make sure that I get everything that I need to communicated to all of you during this time. We are now moving forward with this decision, as I said, and our hopes are to move somewhere around late September to mid-October. That's the goal. It's very likely, it's very probable that we would be here to the end of the year, for all we know. But we want to try to be there by, Lord willing, late September, early October, in that time range. We are currently going through the process of applying for visas. Peggy is a U.S. citizen, but I have to apply for a work visa. A lot of visas have restrictions on them during this time, but the R1 visa, which would be the visa that I would be applying for, seems to be open, and it seems like it's still possible to apply to that visa. You may be asking, well, Sam, what's next? What does that mean for San Marcos? What does that mean for us? What is that going to look for? Well, we talked about this as a session, and we believe that there are a few things that need to happen now that are key. First of all, I want to commend to all of you that we have completed a training process, and we would like to, in the very near future, present to all of you Gilbert Leiva to be Lord willing, chosen by all of you, elected by all of you to become a new ruling elder of our church, and in that capacity to help the church, help the rest of the session, lead the church in a transitional process. That transition includes the need to form what is known as a pulpit committee. This is a committee made up of officers of the church, elders, deacons, but also lay persons, men and women, who would form an elected committee, elected by the congregation in a congregational meeting, to begin the search for a new pastor. So what we would like to do in the near future is transition the session to be made up of the following. Basically, George Even would, Lord willing, transition, and we've talked about this with everyone involved, transition out of his current role as ruling elder into ruling elder emeritus. That would mean that he could still serve and help the church, participate in the discussions of the session whenever the session meets, but he would not be he would not be required to be present for quorum, and he would not have voting powers on the session. And what we would like to do is transition Sam Matier into a ruling elder capacity, a temporal ruling elder capacity, and have a present session with voting powers made up of Gilbert Leiva and Sam Matier. Gilbert Leiva and Sam Matier, Lord willing, would serve heading the session for just over 1 year, Lord willing, to about December 2021. And if the congregation is happy with their ministry and their service, they could be indefinitely reelected or reelected for a term. That's something that the congregation can work out with the session. In parallel, there would be a pulpit committee that would be formed that would hopefully include Gilbert and George, but would not include myself or Sam Matier. Since we have been senior pastors of the church, it would not be appropriate, along with deacons and other lay people who will be chosen. What we hope to do to make it easier is perhaps have a congregational meeting via Zoom, collect your votes that way, make sure that everyone has felt that their voices have been heard and their votes have been genuinely counted, and we would double check and check back with everyone. And we would propose names, I think, is probably the easier methodology after having spoken to the names that we have thought of, and have you vote for those names and form the pulpit committee. We'll work out the specifics in the coming weeks and communicate that to you, but that's the idea. So Sam Matier and Gilbert Leyva continuing on as a session. The congregation, and that's assuming that the congregation has voted for Gilbert, that still needs to happen. But in parallel, a pulpit committee would be formed to begin the search of a new pastor, and that would begin as soon as possible, and we'll let you know more about that in the coming weeks. I just have my notes here to make sure I cover everything. I have proposed a name to the session that the session will pass on to the pulpit committee of someone who I think would do an excellent job as senior pastor of the church and could come down relatively soon. But ultimately, that is decided by the pulpit committee, and the pulpit committee must present their nomination to the congregation. And ultimately, the final choice is with the congregation. By the time we leave, Lord willing, assuming that we do leave roughly in the timeline we've set for ourselves, we'll have been here for almost 6 years. I came on at the end of 2014. By 2017, I decided to firmly plant my church in San Marcos. And unless the Lord moved us as a family, my decision was to stay indefinitely in San Marcos. If it was the rest of my life, I was more than willing to do that. But the Lord's providence is mysterious, and we are taught in the scriptures to hold onto our plans with humility, hold onto our plans with a certain looseness, recognizing that He's in charge. The scripture says that He directs our steps, and boy, does He ever. We are His servants, and He is the sovereign. We believe that the Lord is moving us to the U.S. at this time, and we ask that you would be praying for us during this time of transition, of, Lord willing, the birth of a new child, a new son, Thomas, and we will be praying for all of you during this transitional period. We ask that if you're staying in Chile, that you continue to commit to the church, continue to give to the church. My prayers are that, among other things, that the Lord would bring to San Marcos but a better pastor than I have been, a pastor that will serve you better, with greater maturity, and that actually this next period in your life as a church would be the best period in San Marcos' history. I believe the Lord can absolutely do that. And I believe that the Lord can definitely establish this church, and that the best days of this church are still ahead of her. Until we leave, I plan to continue to serve as your pastor, to preach, to help, to pray for you, to meet with you, counsel with you, and continue to serve you in whatever capacity that I can. And I hope that by the time we leave here, my service, our service as a family to the church, will have left a lasting and positive imprint effect in the history of this congregation. We love you all. We will miss you. This is a difficult choice. It's been a long process, but we are trusting and relying on the Lord's good guidance. The Lord bless and keep all of you. The Lord make His face shine upon all of you and be merciful to you. The Lord lift up His face upon all of you and put His peace in all of your hearts. God bless.